The Hidden Reality of Traditional Harari Wedding Practices by Harari Freethinkers. Introduction. A celebration to start the union between a man and a woman is found in almost every society in the world. In the Harari culture, the traditional wedding is a complex and colorful, multi-day event. While the traditional Harari wedding has been documented in literature, a deeper look into the history and implications of such has not been thoroughly discussed. Hence, this article will examine certain unexplored Harari wedding practices in an attempt to reveal further insights. Honor culture. Inigabutta. The night of the nikah, wedding legalization ceremony, or literally, sexual intercourse, the married couple are traditionally expected to have sex. The next morning, the bride's virginity is announced to the bride's family. This portion of the wedding celebration is called inigabutta. The bride is considered to have lost her virginity if she bled after intercourse. If the bride is declared a virgin, the groom's best man would bring a calf to the bride's home. This tradition was later changed to a white handkerchief stained with blood. At the time of this writing, if the inigabutta ceremony is carried out, a red flower and sweets are sent to the bride's home instead. If the woman was deemed to not be a virgin, nothing is sent to the bride's family home. The next day, women from the bride's social circle will prepare a feast to bring to the newlyweds' home. If the bride's family did not receive the news that their daughter was a virgin, the feast will be left either in the middle of the compound, under a drain pipe, or given to beggars and dogs. A similar tradition is found in Somali culture. It has been documented that after consummation of marriage, if the groom doubts the woman was a virgin, he digs a hole outside his home, renders the end of his tobe, or tears a new hut covering. These actions are meant to disgrace the family. The purpose of inigabutta is to attempt to control the premarital sex life of Harari women. During a traditional Harari wedding, there are two payments made from the groom/his family to the brides. One of the payments is the Islamic mehr, bride price, which is paid for the consummation of the marriage, have sex with the bride for the first time. The second payment is the traditional Ethiopian bride price, which is referred to as magaber by the Harari. This is paid for the virginity of the bride, which is determined as part of the inigabutta ceremony. In an effort to keep up with modern views of women, the payment is no longer commonly thought of as being intended for the woman's virginity. Instead, the new purpose of this payment is for the bride's guardian to ask Allah to bless the marriage, or make dua. A ceremonial payment from the groom to the bride's family is a practice that is shared by various Ethiopian groups such as the Amhara and the Oromo. As a marriage custom of the Arsi Oromo, this payment is called gabara. The Arsi province where the Oromo live is between Addis Ababa and Harar. The Arsi claim they have ancestral links to the Harari through the Hadaya. Problems with inigabutta. Wedding night virginity testing is a practice that is not unique to the Harari people. This is a practice that has historically occurred in many cultures around the world. The practice is based on the false, unscientific myth that during the first time a woman has sex her hymen tears and releases blood. This is not true, as there is no way to know if a woman was a virgin or not based on her physical anatomy. There are many reasons why a woman will not bleed during her first time having intercourse even if she is a virgin. For one, the hymen is not a rigid structure, it is flexible and thus may not tear. Some women have very little hymen tissue, making it difficult to tear and bleed. Also, the hymen may have torn previously due to non-sexual reasons. Therefore, practices such as inigabutta cannot reliably determine whether a woman is a virgin or not, because blood shed after sex does not equate virginity. The inigabutta ceremony is one indicator that demonstrates the Harari culture is an honor culture. In honor cultures, an individual's worth as a human being is based on society. Honor cultures place importance on the socially conferred worth, reputation, and a positive social image, all of which can be granted or taken away by other people. The Harari community has historically been relatively small and close-knit. This means information, particularly negative information about an individual, can travel quickly. In fact, gossip is used as a means of social control within Harari. Honor cultures contrast with dignity cultures, which place importance on context-independent, individual, and inherent worth, which is much less affected by the social regard of others. As demonstrated by the practice of anai-gabata, the worth of a woman can be taken away by her community if she is, fallibly, determined to not be a virgin. Her value as a human being is based solely on whether she bleeds on her wedding night. If she did not bleed, because of honor culture, she is labeled as a bad woman, regardless of her actual characteristics. The value of her character, morals, intelligence, personality, and everything else that makes her a unique individual is irrationally connected to her virginity status prior to marriage. If she was fallibly determined to not be a virgin, her humanity would be diminished in the eyes of her community. Depending on the personalities of the people in her life, a Harari woman could have faced consequences if she did not bleed on her wedding night. If it was thought that she brought shame to her family, she could have faced poor treatment from family or friends as retaliation for not complying with the society's expectations of her. She could have been beaten, verbally abused, abandoned, or even killed. The anai-gabata ceremony is one way in which the Harari community attempts to force conformity upon women. Through the threat of shame and loss of socially conferred worth, Harari women are pressured to not engage in premarital sexual relations. Another problem with anai-gabata is that it sexually discriminates against women. There is nothing comparable to this shaming ceremony for men. The groom's sexual history is never asked about, and he is never held accountable for his sexual past. In addition, if a woman is truly not a virgin, she must have engaged in sexual relations with a man. The identity of the man is never asked from the woman. A woman is not the only one responsible for sexual behavior when a man was also equally involved. The anai-gabata ceremony is a public shaming event that paternalistically broadcasts a woman's private life. Harari women are thus burdened with being held accountable for both their actions and the actions of men. Whether the experience was consensual or not, the woman is still shamed. If the woman was the victim of a sexual assault, the backlash from the Harari community if she did not bleed would be an example of victim blaming. Only making women accountable for sexual experiences is also problematic because men are generally physically larger and have more power and social influence than women. In patriarchal societies such as the Harari community, the power imbalance between the sexes can easily put women in situations where they are coerced into having sex, i.e., for safety, security, financial reasons, or raped by men. To then publicly shame women for the abuse they have suffered by men is truly a tragedy. The cultural idea that Harari women are the custodians of Harari culture and values is not one that women should be proud of. It forces women to conform to sexually discriminating social rules while men are allowed to live freely and without any repercussions from society. Therefore, the anai-gabata ceremony is problematic for many reasons. Most importantly, its inability to accurately evaluate the virginity of a woman has resulted in many women to be unfairly accused of committing an act they never did. The ceremony unfairly shames women and her family whether she had a consensual sexual experience, if her hymen simply didn't bleed, or if she was the victim of a sexual assault. Connections to history of forced marriages, bride kidnapping. 1. Aruz Mudba. During the Aruz Mudba, the coming home of the bride, ceremony of a traditional Harari wedding, the groom's family delivers a mule to the bride's parents' home. The bride is carried on the mule to her new home by the groom and his friends. The bride wears a thin veil covering her face while she is seated. At the start of the Aruz Mudba ceremony, the elderly women sing a song called Zasafta Zikal Malta. The song is associated with the tale of a beautiful girl who ran away from home to escape being married against her will. She manages to escape through asking Allah for help. 2. Shay Tan Mota. Once the bride is at her new home, her friends would toss scarves at her. The bride then wraps herself up with these scarves. The groom would then take off his belt and strike her. He strikes her 3 times. The strikes are meant to symbolically drive the devil out of her. This tradition is called shaitan mota, the leaving of the devil. With each whip, the group chants, "May they be prosperous." The groom then consummates the marriage while his best man stands guard outside the home. This is done as a preventative measure in order to stop any intrusion by outsiders that might prevent the groom from having sex with his wife. The practice of flogging as part of the marriage ceremony is also part of Somali tradition. A bride would be whipped by the groom to tame any shrewdness. This action follows the Arab proverb, "A slave girl from her capture, the wife from her wedding." Similarly, in Kenyan culture, a stick is used to whip the bride during the wedding ceremonies as well. Hypothesis on the origins of Aruz Mugba and Shaitan Mota. These traditions appear to be ceremonial representations of how the Harari people may have married. In the past, girls may have been forced to marry through abductions. In Amharic, this crime is called talafa. In Harari, it is also called talafa. According to Wolf Leslaw's Harari English Dictionary, 1963, the definition of talafa is to snatch away, rob, carry off a woman to marry her by force, rope an animal and make it fall. During marriage by abduction/capture, also called bride kidnapping, a man would abduct a girl and take her away by horseback with his friends. Once they arrive at his home, the abductor would then beat the girl to force her into submission and then rape her. If members of the girl's family or tribe witnessed the abduction, they would chase after the man when he abducted the girl. They would try to get her back and stop the rape, so the rapist would bring some men with him to hold them back. If the girl became pregnant, the abductor could force her to become his wife. This method of securing a mate is an ancient practice that has occurred around the world. Sadly, it is still common in parts of Ethiopia today. This crime is sometimes committed when a man does not have the money to pay for a wedding. He abducts and rapes a girl hoping her family will let him marry her because culturally, a non-virgin girl is considered less marriageable. The Ethiopian practice of talafa, bride kidnapping, mirrors the Somali practice of dabargara. This horrifically barbaric practice includes the beating of a prospective bride until her bones break so that she is silent either because she is unconscious or stops making sounds. The objective is to destroy the willpower of the woman to the point where she has no option but to submit to her abductors and marry a man against her wish. And just like the traditional Harari wedding practice of shaitan mota, where a bride is whipped to remove the devil inside of her, as previously mentioned, there is also a Somali wedding tradition where the bride is flogged to tame any shrewdness. It must be noted that while Islam did not start the concept of forced marriages, all schools of Islamic thought do permit it under various circumstances. For example, the Shafi school of thought, which is the traditional school of thought in Harar and other parts of East Africa, fathers and grandfathers are permitted to force virgin girls into marriage without their consent, regardless of whether or not they have reached puberty. This is why bride kidnapping practices such as talafa and dabargara are not un-Islamic and have been legally practiced by Muslims. The only true consent required for a legal Islamic marriage is the consent of a woman's male guardian, usually her father or grandfather. If a woman's guardian agrees to a marriage but she does not, it is permissible within Islam for a man to beat her or otherwise coerce her into accepting her fate. Even without first asking a male guardian to marry a woman, if he has her raped, he can remove her honor, which leaves her worthless in the eyes of her family and community. This can lead to the male guardian agreeing to the marriage, thus forcing the rape victim to marry her rapist. The practice of talafa and the wedding traditions of Aruz Mugba and shaitan mota share striking similarities. Talafa. The girl is abducted and carried on a horse to the man's home accompanied by the man's friends. Aruz Mugba. The bride is carried on a mule to the man's home accompanied by the groom's friends. Talafa. The man beats her into submission. The goal is to drive the woman to a defeated state both physically and psychologically so that she is not able to resist the abuse. In this state, her only option is to obey her abductor and be at his mercy. Shaitan mota. The groom whips the bride to tame her by removing the devil inside of her. The belief is that by hitting her, any hindrance to her being a good obedient Muslim wife would be removed. Talafa. The man's friends are there to prevent people from entering the home and stopping him from raping the girl, have sex with her. Aruz Mudba. The groom's friends are there to prevent people from entering the home and stopping him from consummating the marriage, have sex with her. Further evidence that suggests talafa was previously practiced by the Harari people. Elderly women sing a song, Zasafta Zakalmalta, that is related to a story describing talafa during the beginning of the Aruz Mudba ceremony. It is still practiced in parts of Ethiopia. The practice of providing a bride price from the groom to the bride's family is correlated with areas of Ethiopia where marriage by abduction continues to exist. Bride price is called magaber in Harari and is given from the groom to the bride's family. In the Harari language, the word talafa exists and means marriage by force. In the Harari language, the word nasa'a means both marry and take or take away. It is also believed to be connected to Semitic words that mean carry and lift. After consummation of marriage, a wedding tradition called feet mukfut would occur where the bride refuses to eat nor drink. This is possibly rooted in the past when brides were understandably outraged or depressed because they were abducted, beaten and raped. 3. Feet mukfut. The day after the consummation of marriage, the bride would refuse to eat or drink. Her mother-in-law would then deliver a gift to her to delight her and make her smile. This is why the tradition is called feet mukfut, which means the opening of the face. 4. Buckle moose. After the feet mukfut tradition, the bride's friends would visit her and bring bananas as a gift to comfort her. This practice is called buckle moose. Hypothesis on the origins of feet mukfut and buckle moose. The wedding tradition of feet mukfut illustrates that the bride is not happy after her wedding night. She is so upset that she refuses to eat and drink. Why might this be? Today, a bride's wedding is commonly thought of to be the happiest day of her life. While the Harari tradition of feet mukfut is no longer practiced, it may be that its origin stems from the time of talafa. It's understandable that a girl would be upset the day after she is abducted, beaten and raped. The girl would have felt terrified, angry, in pain, and traumatized. It would be difficult to feel like eating or drinking after such a horrific experience. After the feet mukfut tradition, the bride's friends would give her bananas to comfort her, buckle moose. Why would a bride need to be comforted after her wedding night? The reason might be related to feet mukfut, where the bride was originally upset and was encouraged to feel better after receiving gifts from her mother-in-law. During buckle moose, the bride is in a state where she still needs to be comforted. This time it's her friends who arrive to cheer her up. And again, it is through the giving of gifts that the bride is made to feel better. Perhaps this tradition is also reflective of what the bride had to experience. In addition to the possibility of talafa, the girl's young age would also make her uncomfortable. Until relatively recently, it was common for Harari girls to marry at a young age. In the 1920s, the average age of marriage for a girl was just 13 years old. Sometimes the girls would marry while they still played with dolls. Therefore, the sexual intercourse the bride was forced to experience would have been painful and confusing. If the girl was a child, the intercourse she experienced by her husband was rape, because a child cannot consent to sex. The likelihood of a negative experience is even more probable considering female genital mutilation, FGM, has historically been a common practice in Harari. The tradition of bananas being brought by the bride's friends can thus be interpreted as a way of consoling her after having to endure such a traumatic experience. A Harari Muslim contemporary perspective. The Inai ceremony in its original form and marriage by abduction are not practiced by Harari communities today. However, the problematic underlying implications about women persist. In the video GHYN Part 1, Harari Traditional Wedding, the speaker describes traditional Harari wedding practices and how honor culture operates in the Harari community. He explains how Harari women were subjected to sexist societal practices that controlled both their premarital and marital sex life. The speaker, disturbingly, provides justifications for these practices. He places the bride as solely responsible for the future happiness of her family by stating that the woman potentially having sex before marriage could ruin the marriage. What about if the man had sex before marriage? The man's actions can also lead to misery in a marriage because the woman can be upset. There seems to be an assumption that a man's sexual past won't cause a woman to be upset, yet a woman's sexual past will definitely make a man upset. A Harari woman is expected to be content with whatever her husband has done sexually before marriage, while her behavior is strictly controlled. It appears that a happy marriage means a happy husband. A wife's happiness is not considered important nor relevant for the longevity of a marriage. As described by the speaker in the video, in the past, a husband would use a stick to indicate his sexual intentions. He would change the location of a stick in the home to indicate to his wife that he was going to have sex with her that night. Specifically, he would pick up the stick, which would usually be lying down on a surface, and hang it in a designated place near an incense burner. A Muslim wife has no say in this matter, as she is expected to be obedient and cannot refuse sex. This leaves Harari women vulnerable to marital rape because her husband can Islamically use her body for pleasure without her agreement. Traditionally, a Harari woman is first encouraged to have sex when her mother gives her incense and an incense burner during her wedding. The Harari bride is expected to fumigate herself so that she smells pleasant and increases sexual desire in her new husband. Another example of how a Harari woman's sex life is regulated by others is apparent after she gives birth. Traditionally, for the first 40 days after a Harari woman gives birth, she rests and does not have sex with her husband. At the 40-day mark, a ceremony called Haras Mota is held for her. During this ceremony, the new mother is encouraged to eat a sesame spread to increase her sexual desire for her husband so she can have sex with him. Thus, traditionally a Harari woman's sex life is regulated by her community and family before and after she is married. Traditionally, what a Harari woman decides to do with her body and when, is based on the desires of her community and husband regardless of whether it aligns with her own feelings, personal values, or goals. If coerced in such a way, these women relinquish control over their own bodies and surrender to their culture and Islam. If a woman lives in a manner outside of what Islam or Harari culture expects of her, she is punished and shamed. The necessity of socially controlling women. Some might argue that the societal control of women's sexual life is necessary to ensure a well-functioning and stable society with traditional family values. Without forcing women to remain virgins, marry, and have children, a community would fall apart. However, this argument fails because as long as a society tries to control only women, while allowing men to act freely without stigma nor shame, societies will always suffer. This is because women represent half of society. If women are suffering because they are being held accountable for both their actions and the actions of men, their society is not well-functioning nor stable. Women raise the future generations of women and men. If they feel betrayed because of the abuse they have suffered at the hands of their own community, how can they raise a well-functioning society? The forcing of women to fit within the narrow ideals of a society does not lead to healthy communities. Instead, it leads to women who are bitter and depressed because they were never allowed to live up to their full potential as human beings. They were denied their right to decide the course of their own life. The limitations placed on them meant their dreams existed only in their imagination while they lived as slaves to their society's expectations. This is not the image of a well-functioning and stable society. It is a tragic society. This situation is even more tragic because of the expectation of contentment. Not only are women forced to take on roles they may not want, they must be happy doing them. A woman from an honor culture cannot express that she is not happy with being a wife nor a mother. In honor cultures, a woman's purpose in life is determined by social norms, which include marriage and motherhood. This way of thinking erases the individuality of women. Not all women want to be married nor have children. It is not an inherent, biological desire that all women have. It is a choice, not a need. A woman doesn't need to have children. In fact, forcing all women to be married and have children whether or not they want them has a negative effect on society. Children from mothers who did not want them could be raised feeling this lack of love. These children could be neglected or even abandoned, leading to intergenerational trauma. This trauma can then affect how that child grows up and raises any children they have, causing a cycle of dysfunctional families that all started from restrictions placed on a woman's choice. Conclusion. The traditional Harari wedding is much more than the beautiful and joyous celebration that it is known to be. The festivities are not solely meant as an occasion to celebrate the joining of a man and a woman. The events of a traditional Harari wedding have a clear focus on the bride over the groom. She is put on trial by her society in a public event meant to grant or deny her worth as a human being. Harari women are not highly valued by their community simply for being who they are. Their value is based on their chastity, and that is what is celebrated as the prize. In the traditional Harari wedding of the past, the bride is carried to her new home, hit, and then comforted for all her suffering. During these events, the bride unknowingly reenacts the actions and emotions of women in the past, possibly her ancestors, who were forcibly married against their will. Meanwhile, the groom reenacts the actions of the abductor who takes a girl, whips her to subdue her, and then rapes her. Before this unconscious play takes place, elderly women hauntingly sing the story of a girl who escaped this tragic fate. Although these sexist practices currently no longer exist in their original form, their harmful and untrue underlying beliefs about women continue to live on. Thus, beneath the elaborate and colorful Harari wedding, the silenced suffering of women hides in the darkness.